Hi guys, it's Lewis from Recycle Bicycle Sales here. In today's video, we're going to talk about 5 things you should never do on your bike. We'll kick things off by talking about the first one, which is about riding unpredictably. As someone driving a car, there's so many different things that they need to be looking out for. They're looking for advertising around the place, cars, they're looking at trucks, they're looking at all these things. If there's a cyclist that just suddenly turns in front of them that they might not have seen, it can be a little bit difficult for them to react. I know that yes, we're all road users and the law is the law and we're supposed to do all these things, but sometimes if you as the cyclist are unpredictable and perhaps just cross over the pathway of a car and they're not expecting it, it can be a little bit difficult for them to react in time. And I'm gonna tell you once that you will come off worse. A couple of top tips that I've got here are just assume that the car hasn't seen you unless you've locked eyes with the car driver and you know that they've seen you. If you haven't locked eyes with them, they might have just seen you in passing, but not really noticed that you were just there yet. So I'm just gonna say again, assume that the car hasn't seen you. The second thing I wanna say there is to use hand signals, turning or perhaps like stopping, all of these different hand signals here. We actually did a video a couple of weeks ago talking about the different hand signals that every cyclist should know, regardless of whether you're riding by yourself or riding with a group. I think it's really important that you know all of these different hand signals on that YouTube video further back. We could also just say keeping a constant speed. If you find that the traffic is slowing down, that might be a pretty good indicator that you should be slowing down as well because a bit of danger might be coming up. Or if the traffic's speeding up, are you able to speed up with it? I know it might be a bit difficult sometimes, but all I'm saying here is go with the flow of traffic. And maybe even don't suddenly brake or suddenly speed up because again, the cars might not be expecting it. If they're following quite close behind you and they know that you're gonna be staying at the same speed, it's nice and safe. But if you suddenly stop and they might have just looked across at a tennis ball that rolled on the road and then they look back and you've been braking quite hard, they might not be expecting it. The second point I want to hit is to keep to the left. Obviously this video is filmed here in Australia, so the law states that we drive on the left-hand side of the road, so contextualize this for wherever in the world that you're watching it. But here in Australia, keep to the left. Often there's a bike lane in the left, so if we can stay in the bike lane, that's going to give us the best chance of staying nice and safe on the road, nice and predictable as well. If you find yourself drifting out of the bike lane into the middle of the road because of whatever reason, maybe you're looking behind you or something like that and you're moving across a little bit, or for whatever reason you're finding yourself floating out of the bike lane, that means you're getting in the way of the car. And yes, I know that the laws and whatever, they all state that the car's supposed to give lots of room when it overtakes you, but something that you can do as a cyclist to make it a little bit easier for them is to simply stay out of the way. So if you stay in the bike lane, that's going to give you the best chance of allowing the car to overtake you safely. Because what we're saying here is that you're far less likely to get hit if you're staying off to the side of the road in the bike lane. Not only does it mean that it's easier for a car to pass you, it's also going to help minimize road rage. I don't know if you've ever been in this scenario where you and a driver are having a disagreement about who's in the wrong, but road rage is just the worst. It's just the worst. It's embarrassing for everybody involved and everybody not involved that's watching it. So best way is just to simply stay out of the way of a car to just avoid all the bad scenarios that can happen. So if a car is coming up behind you and you maybe get the sense that they're a little bit upset, perhaps they're touching the horn or something like that, it's not worth having an argument. Just pull over, let them pass, just don't worry about it. Now I know it's lots of fun to ride with your buddy, but sometimes there's smart times to ride two abreast and sometimes there's not smart times to ride two abreast. For example, if you're riding up in the hills and you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no other cars around the place, maybe you can ride next to each other and have a little yarn. But if you're riding down a busy main road that's got trucks and buses and everybody rushing in to get to work and all this sort of stuff, maybe that's not the right time to be sitting next to each other. Partly just because it's hard for the car to pass you, but also partly because you might be distracted because the conversation is so awesome with your best friend that you're not thinking about all the dangers around the place. So pick and choose when you ride two abreast. Also, I'm going to say you should not pass pedestrians and cyclists unsafely. When I say unsafely, I mean maybe you're both riding down the road and you're trying to get the slipstream right until the last second and then just pull out, and there might have been a car sitting behind you there and you pulled out in front of them, or maybe you've just passed that other cyclist that was just cruising to work with their headphones on and you've just appeared next to them and startled them, and now they're shaking their handlebars and they might be zigzagging over the road because you startled them. So you could just be a little bit more courteous and perhaps, give them a bit of space. And I always say either good morning or good afternoon when I pass them, or If they've got a cool bike, I tell them they've got a cool bike. If you happen to have a bell, you could perhaps ding it on your way through. I ding it a little bit further back so I'm not just startling them when I'm right behind the person, especially if they're a pedestrian, they might be walking along and maybe they've got their dog on the lead, and if you ding the bell as you're passing them, that might startle them or startle the dog, and it can just be a little bit scary. Again, all I'm saying here is just be a little bit courteous to the other road users. And if you don't have your bell, you could even just speak. Just say, you know, passing on the right as you're coming up or whatever it is you're doing, or ding, ding. Here in Australia, we drive on the left-hand side of the road and we also ride our bikes on the left-hand side of the road. So that means when it comes time to overtake someone, we always like to overtake on the right. You shouldn't pass on the left-hand side here in Australia because what you're doing there is undertaking rather than overtaking, and nobody expects an undertake, everybody expects an overtake. So if they hear someone coming up behind them, perhaps you've dinged your bell or you've yelled out ding, ding, or whatever it is you're doing when you're coming up behind them, you might find that they might often move a little bit to the left to give you a little bit of space because they're quite courteous. Sometimes, some people are just mean, but sometimes they'll give you a bit of space. So they might move to the left, and if you're about to pass them on the left, I think they call that a crash. While I'm talking about overtaking, don't try and make the gap. You're not Ayrton Senna, you're not out racing, you're cruising around on the weekend. You don't have to make the gap. You might scare the other person that you're trying to quickly make a gap through, or you might tuck your elbows in to get through 2 sets of car mirrors. And what if one of those cars happens to move, or a door opens, or all this sort of stuff? There's more that can go wrong than can go right if you're trying to just quickly make the gap. In a race situation, it's win or lose, so you want to win. But if you're just cruising on the weekend, nobody wins and nobody loses, we all just have fun. So don't try and make the gap. Another topic I want to talk about here is ride within your limits. I know that it's definitely lots of fun to test your limits and maybe see how fast you can go down the hill, but if you're riding down the hill behind perhaps one of the pro world tour riders who's paid to ride their bike and does hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers every week, they are incredibly in tune with their bike and they know what it feels like to drag a knee around a corner. I mean, maybe not quite, but they know what it feels like to go incredibly fast around the corner. If you try and follow their speed and perhaps you're not that confident on your bike, that could result in a crash. I know it happened to me once. I tried to show off by keeping up with the pros and cut my eyebrow and hit the deck and everything went wrong, and because I tried to push my limits at a time that I probably wasn't quite ready to do so. Tied in with this, you could even just say that perhaps if you're just simply not feeling up to it that day, maybe you've already done 150 kilometers and now you've got to try and show off near that 160 kilometer mark or something like that. If your body's not used to that, that could be a little bit dangerous. On that point of being, I suppose, dangerous and knowing your limits, I could say, if you know that your bike is incredibly worn out, you know, your drivetrain is skipping and it won't stay in gear and something just doesn't feel right on your bike, that might not be the right time to try and test your limits either. Let's say if you've got a cracked frame and you know that there's a big crack in there, that's probably not the right time to go and jump off a curb or try and do a jump or anything sort of over your limits like that. It's probably not even the right time to be simply riding your bike. You should go and get that crack repaired if you know that there's a crack in there. Also, if you're recovering from sickness or injury, you might just want to ease into it. If you've perhaps been dealing with maybe food poisoning or something like that last weekend, maybe your body is not filling up to doing a big 200 kilometer bike ride just yet. You might just need to ease back into it. You might even just be still feeling a little bit under the weather, or maybe you haven't eaten the right food in the last couple of days or weeks, which means that your body's going to fatigue a little bit faster. So just making sure you ease back into it after injury or illness. With all of this being said, if you want to improve your skills on the bike, you do have to test your abilities sometimes. All I'm saying is that there's a time and a place. If you're perhaps learning how to try and do a wheelie, it might be smarter to do it on your street on a Sunday afternoon on a quiet side street rather than trying to do it during peak hour traffic in the middle of the city. The final point that I want to hit here is a little bit more on the etiquette side of things, talking about if you're riding with a group of people, as you're riding along, you might find yourself rolling turns. When I say rolling turns, I mean everybody spends a little bit of time on the front, putting out more energy than everybody else sitting at the back, and then they'll roll to the back while the next person rolls through, and they'll keep sort of going around. Whether you spend 10 seconds on the front or 60 seconds on the front, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you put a little bit of time on the front. If you're sitting at the back for the whole ride, and then you know that the Strava KOM is just around the corner, and you pull out and sprint to the finish line, you are what I would call a dickhead. And I don't like riding with people like that. The best thing you can do is to just pull your weight in a big group ride and just spend a little bit of time on the front. On the same topic, I can say, just communicate. If you're riding along with a bunch of people and you see a pothole coming up that the people behind you might not be able to see, point it out. Pothole coming up, or something like that. Or you might say, slowing down if you're about to start slowing down, or whatever it is. Just talk to each other, use your hand signals. We did a video just recently about different hand signals that you should know as a cyclist, especially if you're riding in with a group of people. Hand signals are one thing, just being vocal, maybe pointing out things. If you see a cool bike across the road, tell your buddies because they want to see the cool bike too. Hey guys, there's a Cipollini over there. Whoa, and then everybody gets to see it as well. All I'm saying is communicate and pull your weight. Also here, we can say, ask permission before you just draft someone, especially if you don't know who they are. Perhaps you're riding along and you see somebody and you start slowly catching up to them and then you just sit behind them for 20 minutes. That can perhaps be a little bit annoying for the person that's doing the riding. If you say, hey, do you mind if I sit on for a second? Or do you want to roll some turns together or something like that? Just so that you're not just simply sitting behind them because it can make people feel a little bit self-conscious. So what's this random person sitting behind me now? This can also just mean that now they know that you're there, so they can point out potholes that are coming up and you guys can communicate together. And final bonus top tip is don't mouth off to cars. If you're out there giving the finger to all these cars or saying mean things to these cars, you are giving us a bad rap. You as one person are giving us as all cyclists a bad rap. So please, in that moment, if you can find a way to just bite your tongue, just simply walk away, you're the bigger person. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you've learned something in this video. If you reckon that there's anything that we should have said in this video that we didn't, let us know in the comments below. Maybe there's something that you think that we should not be doing as cyclists when we're out on the road. Otherwise, I'm gonna say thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next video. See you guys.